The Arizona sun was a merciless overseer that summer of 1872. It burned the land down to its bones and left the earth cracked like a parched lip. Wind hissed through the dry sagebrush, whispering tales of ghosts and gunsmoke. And there, on the edge of the red mesa, stood a lonely cabin, timbers worn, porch sagging, roof patched more times than the owner could count. Clara Whitfield lived there. A widow since the spring floods 3 years back, took her husband Henry and left her with nothing but his rifle, his name, and a stubborn will to survive. She had learned to mend fences, haul water, plant corn, and shoot straighter than most men who rode into town. The desert had a way of sanding a person down to what truly mattered, and what was left in Clara was iron grief, and a strange kind of quiet strength. Each evening she'd sit on the porch with that rifle resting across her knees. The wind carried the smell of dust and mesquite, and sometimes, when it blew from the south, it carried the faint, haunting beat of drums. Apache drums. The townsfolk in Mescal Ridge said the Apache had been pushed back to the mountains, but Clara knew better. She'd seen their smoke on the horizon, like fingers of warning against the sky. Her Henry had been killed out there, freight wagon ambushed near Bitter Creek. The army said it was Apache. Clara never knew for sure, but the pain had long ago turned to a numb scar. That evening, as twilight bled into a bruised purple sky, she rocked in her chair, watching the last light glint off the canyon rim. The silence was deep, so deep it almost had a voice, and in that silence something changed. A shadow moved near the edge of her corral, then another. She stood, rifle ready. The mule brayed nervously. She felt it before she saw it, the sense that she was no longer alone. From the dust came a figure, a tall man on a lathered horse, swaying in the saddle. His skin was dark bronze, his hair long and black, braided with strips of leather. Across his shoulder ran a streak of blood, and his eyes, sharp, steady, fixed on her cabin light as if it were the last star in the desert. Clara raised the rifle. "You stop right there," she shouted, voice sharp as a whip. The horse stumbled to a halt. The rider slid from the saddle, his knees buckling. He lifted his head slowly, eyes meeting hers in the half-light. "You're alone," he said, his voice rough but calm. Then, almost in a whisper, the words that would change her life forever. "Let me give you sons." The rifle trembled in her hands. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The desert wind whirled between them, tugging at her skirt, stirring the dust around his boots. Clara's voice came low, cold. "You get off my land." But the man, Apache by every line of him, staggered once, then fell to his knees. His hand pressed to the wound on his shoulder, blood soaking through the rawhide strap. He didn't speak again, just fell forward, face first into the dust. She stood there, frozen. Logic screamed to leave him. He was the enemy, the kind that haunted her nightmares. But something inside her shifted, something older and quieter than fear. With a curse under her breath, Clara slung the rifle aside and ran to him. His skin burned under her touch. Fever was setting in. She dragged his heavy frame. God help her, he was solid as oak. Up the steps and into the cabin, every muscle in her back screaming. She dropped him beside the hearth, tore his bloody shirt open, and gasped. The bullet had gone clean through, just under the collarbone. The wound was ugly but not fatal if she worked quick. For hours she boiled water, cut away cloth, and cleaned the wound. He never cried out, though his breath came harsh and shallow. When the bleeding slowed, she wrapped his shoulder tight with linen torn from one of Henry's old shirts. Only then, when it was done, did she sit back on her heels, staring at him. His face was hard and proud, even in sleep. Scars lined his arms, old ones, healed silver against bronze. His hair, thick and straight, framed his features like a warrior carved from the desert itself. "What in God's name have you brought to your door, Clara?" she muttered. Outside, thunder rolled over the mesa, the tail of a storm sweeping through. She stood, bolted the door, and doused the lamp. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone in the house. And for reasons she couldn't name, that terrified her more than it comforted her. The storm came at midnight. Wind howled through the cracks, rattling shutters and stirring the ashes in the hearth. Clara couldn't sleep. She sat beside him, watching the firelight dance over his face. Once his eyes flickered open. He looked at her, dazed. "You helped me," he murmured, his voice thick. "You'd have bled to death if I didn't," she replied. He blinked, fighting the fog of pain. "Why?" She hesitated, then said softly, Because I'm not made for leaving men to die on my doorstep. His gaze lingered on her face, as if memorizing it. Then he whispered something in Apache, words she didn't understand, and drifted back into unconsciousness. The hours crawled by. Outside, lightning split the desert sky. Inside, she sat by his side, hand resting on the rifle, heart restless as the wind. In that flickering light, she saw something strange in him, not the wild terror the townsfolk spoke of, but something human, something weary. By dawn, the storm was gone and the world was quiet again. She stepped onto the porch, the desert glittering with the faint shimmer of rain. Behind her, she heard him stir. When she turned, he was sitting up, his dark eyes steady on her. "You saved me," he said simply. "I did what I had to," she replied, crossing her arms. "Now tell me why you were bleeding out in my yard." He studied her for a long time before answering. "The soldier's hunt I am. What they call outlaw." Her pulse quickened. "An outlaw?" His mouth curved, not a smile, not quite. "To them, yes. To my people, I am warrior. Kota." The name hung in the air like smoke. Kota. It fit him. Sharp. Fierce, quiet. "Well, Kota," she said dryly, "you picked the wrong cabin to die at." He nodded slowly. Or maybe the right one. Her heart stuttered. She didn't know why, but she turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with the kettle. That morning, as sunlight spilled through the cabin window, Clara Whitfield realized that something had shifted in the wind. The desert had brought a stranger to her door, one with blood on his hands. Yes, but also a strange calm in his presence, like the earth itself had chosen him to walk her land. And though she told herself she'd send him away once he healed, she already knew she wouldn't, not yet, not until she understood what he meant when he said, "Let me give you sons." The morning after the storm came bright and clean, as if the desert itself had been washed of sin. The air smelled of wet dust and creosote. A few stubborn clouds clung to the hills, and beyond them, the world stretched wide and unforgiving. Clara Whitfield rose before the sun, as always. She moved about the cabin quietly, her boots soft on the old pine floor. Behind her, she heard the man stir, the Apache Kota. His breathing was steadier now, not the ragged wheeze it had been when she dragged him in. She told herself it was only a matter of time. When he was strong enough, he'd ride off, and that would be the end of it. But every time she looked at him, that conviction weakened. He was sitting up now, bare-chested, his wound bound with linen and leather. The firelight caught the sheen of his skin, and she had to force herself not to stare too long. "I made coffee," she said shortly. "It's not much, but it'll wake the dead." He nodded, slow, deliberate. "Coffee," he repeated, his accent thick but his voice rich as thunder over the mesa. She poured him a cup, watched him lift it with his uninjured arm. The steam curled between them like something alive. "You should have gone east," she muttered, half to herself. "There's a doctor in Mescal Ridge. He could have fixed that shoulder proper." Kota took a sip, winced, and said, "Doctor there would finish what bullet could not." She didn't answer. He wasn't wrong. The folks in Mescal Ridge didn't look kindly on his kind. Days passed. He slept most of the first two, eating only what she could coax into him. Broth, cornbread, a bit of jerky. But by the third morning, he was on his feet, slow but steady. She found him outside, chopping wood one-handed. The sound of the axe echoed through the canyon. "You'll tear that shoulder open again," she called from the porch. He paused, looked up at her, and said simply, "Work makes strong." Clara couldn't argue with that. She'd lived by the same truth. When he wasn't splitting logs, he mended her corral fence, fixed the squeak in the porch step, and fetched water from the creek without being asked. He moved with quiet grace, every step purposeful, like a man who belonged to the land more than to the people who fought over it. At first, she kept her rifle close whenever he was near. But little by little, the habit faded. Something in his silence made her trust him, though she couldn't have explained why. One evening, she found him sitting by the fence, watching the sunset turn the cliffs to fire. She brought him a plate of beans and bread. He nodded in thanks and said softly, "Your land is strong." "My husband built it," she replied. Kota's eyes turned to her, deep and unreadable. "He died." "Yes," she said, voice thin. "Raiders caught his freight wagon near Bitter Creek. Army said it was Apache." Kota's jaw tightened, and for a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally did, his words came low and careful. Not my people. Not my band, Clara stared at him. You expect me to believe that? I tell you truth, he said. Many tribes. Many hearts, some good, some lost. The air between them thickened, heavy with ghosts neither could name. She set the plate down and turned away. But before she could go, he added, I do not kill for sport, white woman. I fight when I must. Like you. She froze, hand on the doorframe. Then she went inside without another word. That night she lay awake long after the fire died, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing from the other room. He haunted her thoughts. The way he looked at her, not with hunger or pity, but with quiet recognition, as if he saw something she'd buried long ago. A week passed. Kota's wound began to heal cleanly. He could lift his arm again, and she caught him more than once working behind her back, repairing things she hadn't even realized were broken. One afternoon, she found him at the old well drawing water with a rope he'd braided from strips of hide. Don't you rest? She asked, shading her eyes. He looked at her, sweat glistening on his brow. You work. I work, her mouth twitched. You don't talk much, do you? He tilted his head slightly. Words, not always needed. The longer he stayed, the more his silence spoke to her. There was peace in it, a stillness she hadn't known since before Henry died. But not everyone shared her sense of peace. When she rode into Mescal Ridge one morning to trade for flour and salt, the whispers started before she even reached the general store. Old Mrs. Dobson leaned close to her friend and hissed, That Whitfield woman's harboring a savage? Mark my words, Clara pretended not to hear. But by the time she mounted her horse to leave, the deputy, her own brother, Sam, was waiting near the hitching post. Clara, he said, squinting under his hat. We need to talk. She stiffened. If it's about my taxes, I'm paid up. It ain't about taxes, he said quietly. Folks been saying there's an Apache living on your land. She felt her stomach twist. People say a lot of things, he sighed. I rode out there myself yesterday while you were gone. Found tracks. Moccasin prints. Big ones. Clara's hand tightened on the reins. Then you know he's wounded. He needed help. Sam frowned. You gone crazy, Clara? You're harboring the same kind of man that killed Henry. She glared at him, fire in her voice. You don't know that. You don't know anything. I know he's dangerous, Sam snapped. And if the army finds him on your place, they won't ask questions. They'll burn you out along with him. She said nothing. Just turned her horse toward the road and rode home without looking back. When she reached the cabin, the sun was setting. Kota was waiting by the fence, arms crossed, the desert wind in his hair. They know, she said simply. He nodded. I saw riders in distance. I will leave tonight, her heart lurched. Leave? You're still healing. I will heal faster away from your danger, he said. She stepped closer, voice trembling. And what about me? You think I care what those people say? He looked down at her, his gaze soft but sure. You risk much, why? Clara swallowed hard. Because you knocked on my door, Kota, and I let you in. That makes you my responsibility. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her face with the back of his hand. His touch was gentle, reverent. You are strong, he said quietly. Desert strong. For the first time in years, she smiled. Maybe, she whispered. But even the desert needs rain sometimes. That night, he didn't leave. They ate together in silence, the crackle of the fire the only sound between them. When he rose to go to his bedroll, she caught his hand. Stay, she said, barely above a whisper. He looked at her for a long, still moment, then sat back down. Outside, coyotes sang to the moon. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls. And for the first time since Henry's death, Clara felt the heavy ache of loneliness begin to lift, replaced by something warmer, wilder, and far more dangerous. She didn't yet call it love. But the desert already knew its name. The days that followed slipped by like smoke through dry fingers. The desert sun burned hot, the nights turned cool, and in the middle of that lonely stretch of nowhere, two broken souls found a rhythm neither had expected. Clara Whitfield and the Apache warrior, Kota, worked side by side beneath the vast Arizona sky. They fixed fences, gathered corn, and tended to her small patch of land as though it were a kingdom worth fighting for. It wasn't paradise, not with the sand and wind and silence, but it was theirs. Clara began to notice things she hadn't before. The way he never walked ahead of her, but beside her. How he handled her tools with a kind of respect, as if they were sacred. and how every night when the stars came out, he would sit by the edge of the porch, eyes lifted toward the heavens, murmuring words in his native tongue. "What are you saying?" she asked one night, handing him a cup of coffee. He looked at her, the firelight glinting in his dark eyes. "I thank the sky," he said, "for the breath in my chest, for the ground that still holds me, for—" His gaze lingered on her, "the one who gave me life again." Clara's heart gave a slow, traitorous flutter. She turned away, busying herself with the pot over the fire. "You should be thanking your stubbornness, not me." Kota smiled slightly, that faint, rare smile that lit his whole face. "In my tongue," he said, "we call that same thing spirit." The world beyond her fence hadn't forgotten them. One afternoon, Clara rode into Mescal Ridge again for supplies. The air in town felt thicker now, charged with something she couldn't name. When she stepped into the general store, the chatter died down. Mrs. Dobson stopped sweeping. The blacksmith's boy froze mid-hammer. Even old Sheriff Talbot, sitting by the pot-belly stove, looked up slow and hard. "Afternoon, Mrs. Whitfield," he said, voice like gravel. "You've had company out your way, haven't you?" Clara's jaw tightened. "If you mean a wounded man, yes. He's gone now." The sheriff leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Gone where?" "Back to the hills, I reckon. He wasn't well." "Funny," Talbot said, spitting into the ash bucket. "Because a soldier patrol found a trail of moccasin tracks leading right to your creek bed." Looked fresh, Clara held his stare. "Then maybe your soldiers should learn to mind their own tracks." A few folks chuckled nervously. The sheriff's expression didn't change. "You be careful, Clara. Folks out here got long memories and short tempers. You start taking in redskins, they'll start thinking you turned against your own." She said nothing. Just paid for her goods and walked out chin high, but her hands shook all the way home. When she reached the ranch, Kota was waiting. He could read her face before she spoke. "They know," he said quietly. She dropped the sack of flour on the table. "Sheriff all but told me they're watching. My brother's no better, he's been stirring talk." Kota nodded once. "Then I leave." Her heart clenched. "No," he met her eyes. "If I stay, they come. They burn, they kill. I have seen it before." She stepped closer, fists tight at her sides. "You think I care what they do? You think I haven't already buried enough?" Kota's voice softened, low and full of ache. "You do not understand. They will not just come for me. They will come for you. For the woman who gave shelter to a man they call savage." She glared at him through the shimmer of tears she refused to let fall. "And what am I supposed to do, Kota? Let them tell me who to care for? Who deserves to live?" He looked at her for a long, wordless moment, then reached out and laid his hand on her cheek. His touch was rough, calloused, yet careful, as if afraid she might break. "You are brave," he whispered, "but I cannot let your courage be your death." That broke something in her. She caught his wrist and held it against her face. "Don't you see?" she said, her voice trembling. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost. I'm not afraid anymore." His breath caught. Their eyes met, hers wet with defiance, his full of storm. Then slowly, inevitably, he bent his head and kissed her. The first touch was hesitant, almost reverent, but when her hands rose to his shoulders, all hesitation vanished. The world outside disappeared. The wind, the fear, the whispers. There was only the two of them and the desert that held them. When they finally broke apart, she was shaking, not from fear, but from the flood of feelings she'd damned for years. "Kota," she whispered, "what happens now?" He rested his forehead against hers. "Now," he said softly, "we fight." They did fight, though not with guns or knives. They fought the whispers, the fear, the loneliness that tried to creep back in. Each day they lived as if the world might end tomorrow, working, laughing, sharing the silence. Kota taught her Apache words. She taught him English phrases. At night they sat close by the fire, her head resting against his shoulder while he told her stories of his people. The river spirits, the mountain gods, the way every life had its circle. "You believe all things have a spirit?" she asked one night. "Yes," he said. "Even this land. Even the wind. Even you." "Me?" She laughed softly. He nodded, serious. "You fight. You endure. That is spirit." Her laughter faded. "Henry used to say I was too stubborn for my own good." "Stubbornness," Kota said with a faint smile, "is the same word my people use for love." She smiled too. But there was a heaviness in her chest she couldn't ignore, because deep down she knew the world would not leave them in peace. That truth came one evening when she heard hooves on the horizon. Kota stiffened instantly. Clara grabbed her rifle. From the ridge rode 3 soldiers, blue coats gleaming in the dying light. They stopped at her gate. The lead rider, a young lieutenant, tipped his hat. "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to trouble you. We're tracking a fugitive Apache. Tall, scar on his cheek, goes by the name Kota." Clara forced her face to stay calm. "I haven't seen anyone." The lieutenant nodded, glancing around. "Mind if we take a look around?" Kota stood just inside the doorway, hidden by the shadows. His hand rested on the knife at his belt. "Reckon you'd be wasting your time," Clara said, stepping squarely in the lieutenant's path. He hesitated, studying her face, then tipped his hat again. "If you do see him, ma'am, you'd be wise to tell us. There's a bounty for those who help." She didn't flinch. "Good night, Lieutenant." They rode off, but the warning hung in the air like the smell of smoke before a fire. When they were gone, she turned to Kota. "You see? They're coming." He took her hands in his, eyes dark with something between love and sorrow. "I told you this would happen." "I must leave." She shook her head. "No, I won't let them take you." His voice broke, low and rough. "Clara, you already have." That night they lay together beneath the open sky, wrapped in the thin blanket and the thicker truth that the world would not forgive what they were. But they didn't care. Not anymore. As the moon climbed high and silver, he whispered to her, "Now you understand, Clara Whitfield. When I said, 'Let me give you sons,' I did not mean only children. I meant to give you life again, to make your name live in the wind." "And under that endless Arizona sky," she whispered back, "then you already have." The dawn came soft and pink. Kota rose, eyes hard with resolve. Clara tried to speak, but he silenced her with a kiss, deep, final, full of promise. When he pulled away, he said, "If they come, tell them I died. Tell them I was never here." She reached for him, but he was already mounting his horse. "Kota," he looked back once, the rising sun framing him like a spirit out of legend. "I will come back," he said, "when the red moon rises." Then he rode into the desert, the dust swallowing him whole. Clara stood there long after he was gone, the sound of hooves fading like the echo of a heartbeat. The desert wind rose, whispering through the sage, and though she couldn't see him, she knew, somewhere beyond those red cliffs, the man who had changed her heart forever was still watching the same sky. The months rolled by like a tumbleweed in the wind, restless, directionless, and full of memories that clung no matter how hard Clara tried to shake them loose. After Kota rode away, the world seemed quieter but not in peace. It was the kind of quiet that came before a storm, the stillness that pressed against the heart. Clara went back to her work, though every plank she hammered, every fence she mended, reminded her of his hands. His laughter, his voice low and rich, murmuring Apache words that still echoed in her dreams. She told herself he'd come back. He'd said he would when the red moon rose. But each night that passed without him felt like another promise buried in sand. The townsfolk of Mescal Ridge watched her with sharper eyes now. Some whispered she'd lost her mind. Others said she'd turned her back on God. But Clara held her head high, as if daring the world to speak its poison out loud. Her brother, Deputy Sam Whitfield, rode out more than once, trying to talk sense into her. "Clara," he said one evening, his boots dusty and his temper near breaking, "you think I don't know what's in your heart? You think I don't see it in your eyes every time I say his name?" She turned her back to him, hands steady as she shelled beans at the table. "You see what you want, Sam? I see a woman who's been bewitched," he snapped. "An Apache killed your husband and now you let another take his place? What do you think Pa would have said?" She spun around, eyes flashing. "Pa's been dead 10 years and he'd tell you the same thing I will. Love ain't something you measure by color or creed. It's what keeps you alive in this God-forsaken desert." Sam's jaw worked, but he had no words left. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, dust swirling in his wake. It was 2 weeks later when the trouble truly came. The sun hung heavy and low, the air thick as a furnace. Clara was out by the corral when she saw a thin column of dust on the horizon. Riders. She knew that look. Soldiers, maybe a dozen of them, moving fast. Her stomach turned to ice. They didn't stop at her gate. They rode straight in, horses snorting, sabers glinting in the fading light. The man at their head was broad-shouldered, his blue coat faded but his authority sharp as the steel on his hip. "Mrs. Whitfield," he barked. You've been harboring an Apache fugitive. We're here to take him in." Her heart thudded painfully. "You're too late," she said, voice calm though her palms sweated. "He's gone," the officer sneered. "Gone where?" "Don't know," she lied. "Weeks ago. You'll find no one here but me." He dismounted slowly, stepping close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "See, the thing is, ma'am, I don't take kindly to liars." He nodded to one of his men. "Search the place." Clara planted herself in the doorway. "You've got no right," he smirked. "I've got all the right I need." Before she could react, a rifle cracked from the ridge behind the house. Sharp, sudden, and certain. The officer froze, hand halfway to his pistol. The bullet struck the dirt at his boots. The soldiers scattered for cover. Clara's breath caught. She knew that shot. It was his. Kota was here. From the canyon ridge, a second shot rang out, kicking dust near the officer's feet. "You tell your men to go," Clara shouted. "Get that bastard," the officer roared. But before the men could mount up, Kota came riding out of the sun like some ghost made of fury and fire. His horse was wild, his rifle steady, and his war cry ripped across the valley like thunder. The soldiers opened fire. Bullets tore through the air. Clara screamed, diving behind the porch post as splinters flew. Kota's rifle spoke again and again. 2 soldiers fell. Another horse reared and bolted. The officer drew his pistol. But before he could fire, Kota was upon him, wrenching the weapon from his hand and throwing him to the ground. Dust and blood filled the air. Clara's world became noise and chaos. Then silence. When the dust cleared, the officer lay dead, 2 of his men beside him. The rest fled down the trail, their courage spent. Kota dropped to his knees beside her porch, chest heaving, his eyes searching for hers. "Clara!" She ran to him, clutching his arm. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "Why'd you come back?" He cupped her face with shaking hands. "You were in danger. I could not stay away." For a moment, time stopped. There was only the 2 of them. Blood and sweat and the fierce, wild love that bound them beyond reason. But the stillness didn't last. From the ridge, more riders appeared, this time not soldiers but civilians. Men from town, her brother among them. "Clara!" Sam's voice roared over the wind. "Get away from him!" She turned, rifle in hand. "Don't, Sam, please, he saved me." Sam's face twisted. "He killed men." "You think they'll just let that pass?" Kota stepped forward, hands raised, his voice calm. "I do not want blood. I came to protect, but the men weren't listening." Guns cocked. The air was electric, seconds from violence. Clara's heart hammered. She moved to stand between them, spreading her arms wide. "No more killing!" she cried. "He's not your enemy." "Out of the way, Clara!" Sam shouted. "I won't say it again." She shook her head, tears streaming. "If you shoot him, you shoot me too." The standoff hung like a blade over all of them. Dust swirled. Horses snorted. Somewhere a hawk screamed above the canyon. Then the gunfire came. One single shot. Clara felt the burn before she heard the sound. A searing pain ripped across her shoulder, spinning her backward into Kota's arms. She gasped, clutching at the wound. Kota caught her, his cry raw and desperate. "No!" Her brother's gun smoked in his hand, his face white with shock. "God almighty." Clara, but Kota's rage was lightning. He lunged forward, his blade flashing once, twice. The men scattered. Sam dropped his pistol, backing away, horror in his eyes. In the chaos, Kota lifted Clara into his arms and carried her into the cabin, the gunfire fading behind them. He laid her on the bed, pressing a cloth to the wound. "Stay with me," he whispered, voice breaking. "Stay." Her eyes fluttered open, her lips pale. "You came back," she murmured weakly. "You said you would." Tears streaked his face, falling into her hair. "The red moon is not yet risen," he said, "but I could not wait." Outside, silence crept back in, broken only by the wind. Kota sat by her side until the stars filled the window. When dawn came, Clara stirred. Her voice was soft but alive. "It missed my heart," she whispered. "By an inch, maybe less." Relief flooded his face. He bowed his head over her hand. "The spirit spared you." When she tried to speak again, he pressed a finger to her lips. No words, rest. By the time the sun rose full, he was gone. On the table beside her bed lay a single carved token, an Apache sun symbol etched into bone, and a message scrawled into the wood with a knife. "When the red moon rises, I will return." She kept that message forever, carved deep into her soul as much as her table, and though she didn't know when or how, she believed him. For a man who spoke little, Kota's promises had a way of living longer than words ever could. The desert had changed in a year. Wind had carved new ridges in the sand, and the sagebrush grew thick where once it had been bare. But nothing had changed as much as Clara Whitfield. She was no longer the broken widow who'd once wept by a grave, or the frightened woman who'd hidden behind her porch post while bullets sang past her ears. She was something else now, something the world didn't quite know how to name. The people of Mescal Ridge still whispered when she passed, still crossed the street when she came into town for supplies. But there was something in her eyes that made even the boldest of men keep their distance. Strength, loss, love that defied all reason. She wore her hair loose these days, streaked by the sun. Her hand still bore the scar where a soldier's saber had grazed her. But her heart was a wild, living thing, fierce and unbroken. Every night she looked out across the desert from her porch, waiting. The words he had carved into her table were burned into her memory. When the red moon rises, I will return. And tonight, the red moon did rise. It came slow, vast, and ancient, a blood-colored coin climbing over the mesas. The light poured across the land like a wound opening in the sky. Clara stood there, hands trembling, the wind tugging at her dress. A sound came on the wind, soft at first, like a drumbeat echoing from miles away. Then another, deeper, steady, growing closer. Hoofbeats. Her heart leapt and stumbled in her chest. Out of the canyon's mouth rode a figure dark against the moonlight. Tall, silent, familiar, Kota. He rode bareback, his hair long and bound with a leather thong, his eyes fixed on her like a man who had crossed the dead lands and come back alive. When he reached her gate, he dismounted without a word. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. You came back, she whispered. He nodded once. I promised. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. They said you were dead, that the army found your camp and... He raised a hand, quieting her. Many were taken, but I am not so easy to kill. Then he smiled, a slow, small smile that seemed to melt the space between them. She took a step closer. All this time, I thought I'd lost you. You did not lose me, he said softly. I had to make peace with my people. They would not accept a woman who was not of their blood, not until I proved my spirit was strong enough to lead. She looked at him, eyes wide. Lead? He nodded. The elders chose me to guide them north, a new home, away from the soldiers, away from the hate. And you came back here? She asked, voice trembling. Why? His gaze softened. Because no home is home without you. The word struck her like a storm. For a long moment she just stood there staring up into those deep, fire-lit eyes. Then she stepped forward, closing the last distance between them. His hands found her face. Hers found his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. When their lips met, it was not the first time, nor would it be the last. But it was the one that carried every mile, every battle, every tear they'd ever known. The kiss was not gentle. It was the kind born of survival and defiance, of love that refused to die. When they finally parted, the desert was utterly still. Even the coyotes seemed to hold their song. You can't stay, she whispered. They'll come after you again. I know. Then why risk it? He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the faint scar beneath her eye. Because the heart is not wise. It only knows where it belongs. They sat together on the porch through the night, speaking little. He told her of his people's journey north, how they found a valley beyond the San Juan River where the grass grew high and the soldiers rarely rode. She told him how her brother had left Mescal Ridge, guilt eating at him until he couldn't bear to stay. How she'd rebuilt the ranch alone with no one but the wind for company. The fire between them never dimmed. When dawn came, they watched the sun climb over the desert. The light touched the red rocks, the scrub, the distant peaks. I could come with you, Clara said suddenly. I could leave this place, leave the whispers, the hate. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. If you come, you must come forever. My people will not let you return once you cross their border. She hesitated. Behind her lay the grave of her husband, the house she'd built, the land that carried her family's name. Before her stood a man who was her future and her freedom. The silence stretched, filled only by the song of a lone bird. Then she smiled faintly. Ain't much left for me here but ghosts. Kota's eyes softened. Then come. He rose, offering his hand. She took it. They rode north that day, side by side, across the wide desert. The wind whipped through Clara's hair, the horizon endless before them. At night they camped beneath the stars, wrapped in a single blanket. The firelight flickered, across their faces casting shadows that looked like the ghosts of the past, and she realized she was no longer afraid of them. He told her stories in Apache, his words low and musical. She didn't understand every word, but she didn't need to. The language of love needed no translation. Days passed into weeks. The land changed, red rock giving way to green valleys, the air growing cooler, the rivers fuller. When at last they reached the hidden canyon where his people had made their home, Clara stopped in awe. The valley was wide and lush, filled with cottonwoods and streams that caught the sunlight like silver. Children played near the water. Women tended fires. Warriors stood watch on the ridges, their faces proud and strong. They watched her warily as Kota led her in. An old woman stepped forward, the same elder who had once refused to speak to Kota when he'd sought their blessing months before. Her eyes were sharp as flint. This is the woman, she asked. Kota nodded. She is my heart. The old woman studied Clara for a long moment. Then she reached into a pouch and pulled out a small feather dyed crimson. Then she must take the trial of wind and fire, the elder said. If her spirit is strong, she may walk among us. Kota tensed, but Clara laid a hand on his arm. What must I do? She asked. The elder gestured to the fire. Step through it. Do not flinch. Do not turn away. The flames danced high. Clara swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. But she stepped forward. The heat bit at her skin. Her dress smoked at the hem. But she did not stop. When she came through the other side, her hair glowing in the firelight, the people murmured softly. The elder nodded. Her heart is true. Kota exhaled, relief flooding his face. He took her hand and kissed it before the tribe. That night, they danced under the red moon, surrounded by the drums and songs of his people. Clara's heart beat to the rhythm of the earth. When the music slowed, Kota leaned close and whispered, Now you are one of us, no more waiting, no more fear. She smiled, eyes shining. No more alone. And as the moon climbed high above them, red and fierce and eternal, Clara knew. She had found what the desert had been trying to teach her all along, that love, like the land, was harsh and endless. But if you were brave enough to stay, it could give you a forever no church, no law, no man could ever take away.